morning to everybody. Very happy to be with you today to have this last roundtable of the morning sessions, which is dedicated to a very hot topic, tomorrow's infrastructure to achieve a net zero objective. So first of all, before introducing the discussion, I will ask my fellow panelists to come on stage. Mr. Rodolphe Brum, first. Rodolphe? Okay. Then Mrs. Guide. No, not yet. Mr. Matthew Norman? No. Yes, she's here. Mr. Norman. Mr. Tardivi is arriving, maybe. Yes, he's here. And Mr. Ambroise Fayol, who is our who is in Luxembourg. Bonjour, Ambroise. Thank you very much. So I will make a quick introduction to the discussion and then ask the different panelists to present themselves. So as you all know, the net zero economy by 2050 is now our official common objective in the EU, in accordance with the Paris Agreement, with an important milestone in 2030, requiring a reduction of CO2 emissions by 50% from 2010 levels. And as you know also, most G20 countries have pledged carbon neutrality by 2050 or 2070. So it's our common goal, and net zero refers to a state in which the greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere are balanced by removal out of the atmosphere. This net zero term is very important because this is the state at which global warming stops. So our common goal is to stop global warming by 2050. Getting there will require major changes to the way that we heat our homes, travel, and live our lives. As we move towards a net zero world, the sectors that can make the biggest difference are those that rely heavily on infrastructure, electricity generation, heat, surface transport, among all. These include going faster and further with many of the technologies that are already available, but also a rollout of low-carbon hydrogen production, carbon capture, and storage. Investing in infrastructure will play a prominent role to make the transformation of our economies happen in the next years and finally achieve this net zero objective. It means investing in new infrastructure as well as retrofitting existing infrastructure. For example, improving energy efficiency of private and public buildings, replacing coal-fired power plants. And when you look at the numbers, according to certain estimates and existing research, this transformation may require an additional flow of investment in infrastructure representing 1% of GDP each year during the next 20 years. This challenge is, as you see, very ambitious. And we have today, our panelists, a very diversified group of key players of this transformation, including private and public sector representatives, covering investment, banking, contracting, and advisory industries. So I want you now to introduce yourselves, beginning with Ambroise. Give you the floor for a word presentation. We can't hear you yet.
I need to, yeah, I am unmuted now. Good morning to all of you. Apologies for not being with us this morning. I'm in Luxembourg, which is the headquarters of the European Investment Bank, the Bank of the European Union, which is transforming itself into the European Climate Bank. And I'm Vice President in charge actually on climate issues there.
Thank you, Ambroise. Then Mrs. Galb.
Hello. I think I would borrow my neighbor mic. So Diane Galb, happy to represent the Suez Group in this panel. I'm heading the strategy, the transformation, but also I am the CEO of a new business unit around digital and new verticals as far as environment is concerned, such as air, smart city, smart agriculture.
Thank you. Rodolphe Brum.
Hi, so I'm Rodolphe Brum. I'm a partner at Antin Infrastructure Partners, where I'm more specifically in charge of a new strategy which is oriented towards next-gen infrastructure, so investing earlier in the infrastructure cycle.
Thank you. Matthew Norman.
Good morning. Delighted to be here today. Matthew Norman. I run the global infrastructure business for Crédit Agricole CIB. Looking after not only the structured financing activities, but across all the different products. And the way we're looking at infrastructure is covering the sectors that Jean mentioned earlier, including all of transportation and the utility sector.
Thank you. And finally, Patrick Tardivi.
Good morning, everyone. I'm a M&A and private equity partner with Auric, specialized in infrastructure. I'm heading the Paris office and the global M&A and private equity team.
Thank you. The first question will be for Ambroise Fayol. I would like to know what infrastructure assets do you consider as the most critical to implement a net zero strategy at the European level, and how does it change the financing strategy of EIB?
Thanks a lot, Jean. And let me just start by saying just a word of introduction to say, obviously, infrastructure for the European Investment Bank has always been very, very important financing. It represents year after year a very important part of our financing. Even in 2020, 15 billion euros out of around 60 billion euros of financing. So it's having a reliable, smart infrastructure system is key for the sustainability, for business, for competitiveness of Europe, for jobs. So that's also why it is a priority for us. The second thing I'd like just to say as an introduction is we need to build back better. We need to build back after the COVID crisis. We need to build back also greener. And that's what we are aiming at. And it means also one word that you will hear more and more ahead of Glasgow and the COP26, which is adaptation and resilience. So that's what we are actually working on currently at EIB. Now, to answer your question, Jean, for us, the two most important ones are sustainable transport and low carbon energy. And actually, if I can just say a few words, what we need to do is, I mean, we know that transport creates, is so important for competitiveness and for prosperity, but also that it also generates vast amounts of CO2 emissions, and it contributes to basically to climate change and air pollution. So what we are trying to do is to finance projects that are green and innovative, and I think this is what we are trying to change in the way we operate in transport. And let me just say a few examples, because I think it says better than the rest. Two examples of green projects that we have financed recently. We have financed a Greenway EV charging network station that is ultra-fast charging network for electric vehicles in Central and Eastern Europe, Central and Poland, Slovakia, and other European countries in Eastern Europe. And the second project is Cargo Beamer, which is combining railroad terminals in France, in Calais, in Germany, and in Italy for combining transport wagons, rail motorways. That is also something that is quite important. And in terms of innovative and efficient, we also try to support as a public institution energy demo projects. For example, like our project that also dealing with intelligence, artificial intelligence, like a project that I visited actually on Friday in Nice, which is a Vlog, that is a platform to be used by shared mobility services in the EU, and actually which is one of the best placed companies in the world on this. In terms of low carbon energy, what we try to do is indeed to promote low carbon energy. We have decided in 2019 a new energy lending policy that has actually translated into a quite radical position of the European Bank, which is to stop the financing of all fossil fuel projects. And that is something that, including gas, and that's something that we think is a good way to promote transition, to foster basically other kind of investments that we can support in terms of grid or diversified energy sources and strengthening cross-border interconnections. Just two examples there that we have financed since then. We financed the development of infrastructure to transport low carbon gases, including actually through the rehabilitation and adaptation of existing gas infrastructure when it is part of this goal, and that's what we have done in the Netherlands. And in the French Guyana, we have financed the construction of photovoltaic plants with a hybrid storage system with batteries and hydrogen in French Guyana. That is a project that has the interest, especially for those very remote locations, like overseas territories. So I'll stop there, Jean. But clearly, the issue is to center on innovation, to center on how you can scale up the innovation that you can finance, and how you can increase and contribute to the people's resilience.
Thank you very much, Ambroise. So sustainable transport and low carbon energy, these two priorities for the EIB in the pursuit of this net zero goal. I turn to Mrs. Galb to ask you in your industries, water and waste management, how do you integrate this net zero objective? Is it embedded in your business strategy? Do you imagine new solutions for your clients with this goal in mind?
Yeah, it's totally embedded in our strategy, because as an environmental company, it is our duty to find answers and concrete solutions to help on the path to net zero. So we were the first, more than 10 years ago, to talk about zero waste, coming from a recycling company and waste management company. It was kind of disruptive, and we have continued to invest a lot about climate and sustainable solutions. So concretely, it's embedded in our targets, in our financial targets, extra financial targets, through various mechanisms. So we committed to the 1.5 trajectory. We are science-based targets approved, and we are also best in class in all the major extra financial criteria and agency. but also, more concretely speaking, we decided in 2019 to go only for projects with 100% sustainable solutions. It means that all our development capex are going to turn to fully renewable or carbon neutral or positive carbon, I would say, solutions. So this is very important in our strategy. What is very interesting about being here today is the fact that the path to net zero is not going to come only from the industry. It's going to be really an alliance between financing institution, governmental policy, and industry, being able to use our innovation and our R&D to provide concrete solutions. To give some examples about solutions that we can design today and implement concretely on the field, you have, of course, circular economy solutions. So today, if we want to respect the target set up by the European Union, we will have to invest 17 billion euros by 2027 to upgrade the waste industry towards more recycling. To give a concrete example on what it can achieve in terms of net zero pass, with 1 million tons of plastic recycled, you are able to erase the contribution of 1 million vehicles per year in terms of emission of greenhouse gas. So these are major contributors to the path to net zero. Other type of solutions, and Jean talked about it in his introduction, it's about retrofitting, revamping infrastructure, and I'm thinking of water, where the need is absolutely huge to renew infrastructure. The US have implemented a very big 150 billion euro plan to be able to improve the quality of the networks for essential services for water. But all of that means that at the end of the day, by retrofitting the industry, removing the leaks in the networks for water, you are going to save a lot of energy. You have to know that today, in terms of electricity consumption, 1% of the total electricity consumption is derived from the treatment of wastewater. So there are some aspects that we don't see firsthand, but that in fact, by improving, using digital tools to improve the distribution of water is going to contribute a lot to net zero. There are plenty of other examples, but maybe we'll have the time later on to talk about biogas, for instance, or other electricity major solutions.
Thank you very much for this statement about the role of the waste and water industries in this strategy. I was impressed by the number you mentioned about the 1 million tons of plastics represents the consumption of 1 million of vehicles. It's very, very impressive. So recycling is a key topic in this respect. I turn now to the finances of this roundtable, Mr. Broom and Mr. Norman, to ask you how this, in the investment policy of your organization, be it an equity fund or a bank, how do you take into account this net zero objective? What are the KPI to monitor your sustainable investment strategy? Rodolphe?
Thank you, Matthew. So no, I think for us as an investor, and I hope for all investors, net zero is something which is fundamental. And it's not because of PR or your ESG per se. It's because if it's not sustainable, if it's not going to the right direction, then basically an asset has no future, and it has no future for us as an investor. It is not a good investment. So this is absolutely fundamental. And at all level, we're implementing in two different ways. The net zero is basically implemented in two different ways. The first way is basically we are in our investment process, whether it's at the due diligence level or the monitoring level, we are monitoring, especially carbon emission, but more generally the environmental impact of our assets. So this is something which is not fully integrated. When we do a technical due diligence, we have to know this. I mean, we mentioned some aspect about the recycling, but obviously we need to know exactly the absolute impact of the project we invest in, and also the relative impact compared to if we do nothing. So all this is clearly something which is now embedded in our thinking. The second aspect in which we integrate the net zero is actually to have the right tool to invest in what is required to go to net zero. And some of the tools we have, as an infrastructure fund generating yield, are not appropriate for all investment to do that. So one of the things we did, and I was referring to that earlier, is that we created, for example, a new initiative which allow us to invest earlier in the cycle, where we have less cash flow constraint. We can invest, in smaller, sometime in just a team to basically roll out a new infrastructure, which a lot of these projects will require. Again, referring to plastic recycling. I mean, plastic recycling, it's a gigantic market, and we believe that infrastructure investor, we will be able to invest to finance some of these, and the existing tools of most infrastructure funds don't enable that. So that's why we are being equipped with this fund to be able to basically do a role, but also to be able to take advantage of the opportunities which are being created by this move to net zero.
Thanks, Rob. Maybe I'll just comment on the banking side. I mean, for Crédit Agricole Group, it's an absolute imperative that we support the decarbonisation of the economies and help support our clients on that journey through to net zero. From the bank side, Crédit Agricole has been a pioneer of climate finance over the last 10 years. Some examples there, we help facilitate the development of and are a world leader in green bond financing and sustainable linked financing. The bank has been financing large-scale renewable projects on a global basis for more than 20 years. And I think what's important as well is looking at those industries that have been contributing to large-scale carbon emissions. So from a coal side, the bank has committed in 2015 not to finance any new coal projects, and has also signed up to the Paris Agreement to facilitate the gradual wind down of its thermal coal portfolio, which is to ensure that there's no new coal financing from 2030 for the EU and OECD, and then for 2040 in relation to other geographies. Just in terms of the infrastructure sector, the bank is a huge provider of financing. It's a capital-intensive industry. The bank closes in excess of 30 to 40 transactions a year on a global basis in structured finance. And so we are very much at the forefront of facilitating the technical change and technologies that are necessary to facilitate the energy transition, just to either in the form of either lead financier or advising clients on capital raising. Some examples there include the HYPE transaction, where we advised on an equity raising to facilitate the hydrogen implementation of a taxi fleet in Paris. We're also advising on two very large-scale transportation and utility projects. One is in the Nordics for a ferry business that will migrate to green hydrogen. The other one is on a large-scale green ammonia project in the Middle East. So it's critical. It's at the heart of what we're doing in terms of facilitating that transition to net zero, and the bank is very much at the forefront of that market. Thanks
a lot. And finally, Mr. Tardivi, as a lawyer and from your specific business, what are the challenges for you with this net zero objective?
Well, thank you, Jean. I think, we're a player of our own, right? So we have ourselves also to achieve net zero. Well, we're not a huge player, but still we're working on on reducing our impact on our own. But more importantly, we're trying to help and assist our clients in achieving that objective. And I think, as you mentioned, Matthew, this is a journey, right? We're talking of transition and getting to net zero. This is not radical. I mean, of course, the target is radical, but the journey to get there has to be gradual. So we've set up a dedicated group to ESG, in which we are helping our clients identify challenges and address, the policies and the ways to achieve net zero. And interestingly, I think this will be a highly regulated area, because I think it's the first time that we're having an overarching regulation that says, achieve net zero and by 2050 or 70, and reduced by 55% in the meantime. Which in practice, we are, as lawyers and as players in the industry, we are used to dealing with sector-specific regulation, right? And here, we're having a global regulation that is likely to turn into many pieces of law, statutes, and contracts that we will have to help our clients with understand and navigate and comply with it and take the benefit out of it. And I think there's also one important aspect is, this energy transition is going to leave, as we know, certain stranded assets behind, right? Yeah. And we're also trying to help our clients, transition those stranded assets into, retrofitting to the extent possible to make sure that we can make use of all the assets available toward that objective.
Thank you. Thank you. As I listen to you, I think there is a common theme, which is this idea that with such a novel objective, net zero by 2050, every player needs the others, meaning that we need more regulation, maybe more incentives too, but we need also cooperation between the contractors, the advisors, the investors, the bankers. And so I would like to ask you in this second set of questions, what would be the best regulatory environment that you would like to be implemented in the European Union? What is the best incentives that the economic actors should have to be more targeted to this net zero objective, be it in the water sector or in the energy or in the transportation sectors? And first of all, maybe I will turn to Ambroise, if he's still there. Yes, he is. I
am.
I would like to ask you, what level of commitment do you expect from the private and public sectors in terms of investment? And do you consider that project finance, PPPs, in a larger sense, should play a role, and what role, to achieve this huge investment efforts that we need to achieve the net zero goal?
Well, let me tell you, Jean, how we are targeting our climate policy. What we have done last year is to decide on a set of very ambitious decisions, both qualitative and quantitative. In qualitative terms, we have decided that all our projects would be Paris aligned as of January 2021. So this is already in place. And actually, we are now working on something quite more complicated that we hope to present in Glasgow, which is what about the Paris alignment for counterparts, not only for projects, but also for companies that we are financing. And in terms of quantitative targets, what we have decided is that by 2025, we would put the level of our projects that are financed through through climate action from 25% to 50%. So that is clearly meaning that we are going to do much more as a public institution in terms of renewable, in terms of innovation, in terms of transport. I mean, everything, energy efficiency, anything that we finance now has to have basically a climate component. And together with that, there are things that are clearly for public sector institutions. For example, when you do the breakthrough energy venture with Gates Foundation, because you know that to reach the climate targets, you will need innovation that you are not even aware of what they are today. And this is what this breakthrough energy venture fund is targeting with the Gates Foundation. That is for public institutions, I think, to support that. But we need to do also what is in the DNA of the institution, of our institution, which is the crowding in. So our objective is to try to trigger 1 trillion of investment mobilized in the critical decade from 2020 to 2030. That means that we are going to leverage basically and try to bring private sector investors to finance with us projects that have a high climate component. And this is something that shows also the importance that we attach to the support of private investors, because we will miss the target if the private sector is not really financing more and more of this kind of projects with a high climate component. Let me finish by saying 2 things about things that I heard and that I'm not sure I agree with, actually. I heard that the goal is radical, but the road has to be gradual. I am not sure this is true. And I was listening to what was also the conclusion of the previous session. I was a bit concerned about this kind of statement that, well, this is a transition, we need to take our time. I mean, what the reports we hear, not only from the IPCC, but from the International Energy Agency last year, is that we need really to do it quickly and speed up now, because otherwise we will never reach the net zero target that we have for 2050. And actually, I think this is a comment that one of the panelists made, and I very much agree with. We are pushed on that actually from the investors. Investors are more and more asking to be sure that what they are investing in is not going to be basically stranded assets in a few years from now. And I think the success of the green bonds, which is a small part of the bond business, but the success of it, the development of green bonds also outside Europe that we are trying to do also as part of our business is something that makes me more confident that this radical transformation is on the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambroise, for these ideas of a goal which is radical, but the transition is also must be fast and not so gradual. Thank you. I turn to Mrs. Galb and Mr. Broom, Nordman, and Tardivy. In your industry, what would be the most powerful incentives that governments should decide to accelerate the transition to a net zero objective? What are the brakes that should be lifted in this respect?
Maybe to start, but I clearly share the sense of urgency that Mr. Fayol was mentioning. But to be able to act fast, what we need is stability. I mean, that's the stability of regulation, of the framework, of the tax framework, notably. So I think a very good step forward was the taxonomy. At Suez, we implemented this 1 year in advance with 75% of our turnover compatible with the taxonomy. But the issue is to which extent it will be a major tool. What are going to be the real tax impact if you do not meet a sufficient part of your turnover as an industry, and also very important for the investors, what are going to be the real consequences? What about green finance linked to the taxonomy? I mean, these are going to be very interesting driver for investor and industry. And the second topic about stability is regulation. There might be very broad framework at European level, but when you look at the countries, you still have very diverse regulation. If I look as far as water industry is concerned, as at the UK or Italy, for instance, you have major investment going forward with a very regulated asset-based type of compensation planned for investors. So these are going to trigger really private investments. In France, today we are at 200 million of stimulus on the water sector, so very far behind and not with an asset-based regulation model. So this might create a gap with retrofitting and renewing the industry. So this is the point of attention.
Rodolphe?
Should I go again? Yeah.
Matthew?
No, I mean, unsurprisingly, and that's fortunate, I think we have a very much a similar point of view. I mean, we are a for-profit investor, and we need to be able to rely on something which offers high visibility. So in that sense, we're not prescriptive on the solution, but all the solution offered need to offer that. And I think if we take a pretty good example of a recent success and across the world of how the renewable energy has been developed over, across the globe over the last 20 years, let's say. There's been very good things done and enabling the development of such assets. At the same time, you can see, at the tail end, and I won't quote any countries, not to vex anyone, but there's been countries which have been at the end of that are coming back because they need it less now. They want to come back on some of their earlier commitment, and this could impact, the way you look at future projects. So that's why it's very important when you commit large sums of money into long-term assets. And as I say long-term, it's more than a holding period. The assets are going to survive once an investor like us exit. Well, you need to be able to provide that. So again, I think, and again, taking the example of the renewable energy, it can come in the form of subsidies. It can come in the form of feeding tariff or availability. The carbon emission schemes are also very good models, again, depending on which assets. But again, all this needs to offer long-term visibility. And again, it's absolutely critical that it's done. To echo something that Diane was saying is I think it's also, while you can be opportunistic and you can rely, you can have different regulation for the same thing in different countries. I do think it's much easier if at the EU level, there could be, on a single sector, there could be similar solution adopted. Again, on the carbon, on the carbon trading level, I think it will be by definition the case. But again, other things, when it's regulation on the asset level, I think it will be easier if there's not something which is availability and something which is more open to competition or subsidies. It will make it easier. But again, we're not prescriptive and we'll adapt. But we can see in some spaces where there are, people are investing more in some countries which are being opportunistic, even though it should be a pan-European market and a solution.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, look, I share the comments made earlier around the sense of urgency. I just think to take a step back for a minute, the magnitude and speed of the carbon reduction targets are really very, very ambitious. And the combination of sort of public public pressure and opinion and the private sector markets just won't be enough in order to us to achieve those targets. So what we're seeing on the ground right now is, we're seeing small projects developing with specific objectives. I think I mentioned some earlier. Government setting a specific objective to decarbonise a fleet of electric buses within a concession, or to introduce green hydrogen on a particular concession in a specific project. I think this is all well and good, but the challenge here is if that's the way we're implementing it, we're just not going to get to the target. So we really need a catalyst, and that's where the government regulation comes in. And I think it was mentioned earlier by my colleague on the panel that there's overarching regulation that is not sector-specific, which is useful, and we've seen that facilitating some investment in some areas. I think electric vehicle charging is one of those. But actually what we need is specific sectorial regulation, and we need to get down into the granularity of what that means. So, and I'll give you some examples there. First one being, if you look at take hydrogen or carbon capture, for example, what we need there, these are assets that typically are of public interest. You can look at them across and compare them against water networks or the current existing gas networks. You're not going to facilitate a competitive environment there to allow multiple build out of those networks. So it's something that's monopolistic by nature. There's a very well-trodden sectorial regulatory path for that, a regulated asset-based approach, which has worked across Europe. So we should be looking to roll that out for those sort of carbon capture and hydrogen projects, particularly on the transportation and storage side, as an example. The other areas where you're trying to facilitate perhaps more of a competitive market dynamic, take electric vehicle charging, for example. What we're seeing is that market's evolving already, but what we're seeing is the private markets resulting in solutions where those private investors obviously naturally are going to the areas where demand is greatest and that the economic rationale is the strongest. The risk there is you end up with electric vehicle deserts in some of the regional areas where the demand just isn't there. So what you need to do there is break that, perhaps, and I use an example there as perhaps the fibre rollout that's been done in some of the regions where you have a combination of subsidies and or concessions to give that exclusivity. Again, the critical point here is creating predictability, stability of the regulatory framework such that people can invest, because these projects are hugely capital intensive and the payback period is very long. So we need that. That's critical in order to facilitate this ramp up in investment over the next few years.
Thank you. Patrick?
Yes, well, I can only echo what has been said by the other panelists and Matthew in particular. I think, I mean, we've always had that debate about regulation or incentives or subsidy. The reality is that we always end up mixing, right? And I think that's probably the right approach. The key word that's been said is stability and predictability. I think investors are looking, I mean, investors in infrastructure are long-term investors, so they're looking for long-term returns and therefore long-term stability of their investment. They want to know where they go. And we know that, whether the regulation or the incentive have not always been as stable as expected. I think one other important element is that to get from the macro to the micro, right? Which is this overarching regulation which needs to feed in sector regulation, but it also needs to feed in each and every contract that is entered into by the public authority to set the right objectives for that. And I think the example Matthew took about the high-speed network, the fiber one, is a good one. There are areas where private initiative is largely enough because demand is there and because the private investors are going to do that. There are other areas where the private investors cannot do it because the projects are not bankable. And in those areas where we will critically need EV charging facilities, we will need incentives to get there, or some sort of regulation in the form of concession agreements. The same way we've done with this très haut débit rollout, which I mean has been a success, and I think everyone sees it as a great success. Just maybe one word about digitalization, because that's becoming, of course, increasingly important, including for the monitoring and the maintenance, the preventive maintenance of infrastructure. And that's great, because that's I mean, there are lots of savings to be done there. I think water is probably a good example of where savings can be made through digitalization. But as I was saying earlier on the energy transition, digitalization is going to require additional power, right? Additional energy, we know that. So when I was saying that it has to be gradual, and I think we have to find the resources to fund this energy transition. And, you know, I mean, if we say, I mean, vehicles, thermic vehicles cannot be used after whatever the date is, 2030 or 2035, we have to make sure that by that date we have set up everything right so that people can effectively use electric vehicles. And in order to do that, we need to roll out EV charging facilities throughout our territories. So that's why I was saying, you know, and in order to do that, we need to fund that rollout. And I don't think, and I think everyone on the panel, public money is not going to be the only solution to funding that. We need private investors to do that. And if we need private investors to do that, we need those private investors to, I mean, we need to let them go out gradually from the old-fashioned energy, let's call it this way.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I think the example of the EV charging stations is very good, because what you suggest, if I understand, is to replicate what we did in France with the rollout of high-speed internet throughout the regions in France through concession contracts awarded after a call for tender with a certain amount of subsidies, but which has been a success. You're right. We have the high-speed internet network throughout the country now, and the contractual arrangements which have been decided with the different regions of France may be an example of what we could do maybe for the EV charging stations. But it would mean that we decide that in a region which is not very dense, we'll have only one charging station network and not competing networks as it is for the internet. But we need to implement a contractual arrangement which is not yet the case in France, at least. I don't know if you have any other examples of such arrangement in other countries, but it would be interesting maybe to hear from you on that subject. Yes, Matthew?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. Yeah, look, I mean, it's an idea that we've been developing on our side as to one of those situations where you're trying to crack that solution of projects that, you know, just suffer from being potentially uneconomic or have a lack of demand, but need to facilitate the energy transition. So from our side, I mean, EV rollout is still at very, very early stages, but as I said, where we're seeing it right now is it's happening in those, because it's private market led currently with this overarching global regulation, we're seeing that evolving in the denser economic clusters and less happening in the regions. So trying to crack that problem is, you know, an area, as I said, the concession framework with subsidies looks like something that could facilitate that. We're seeing that in less the concession framework, but certainly the exclusivity provision. We've seen that in some other countries where there is an exclusivity arrangement in place that is allowing the development of transit charging, which is also an area which is quite a tricky one to crack, because at the moment you're trying to take a view around ramp up of EV vehicles, and that exclusivity provision has enabled the private sector to invest.
Okay, so I keep this idea maybe for future projects. We have 2 minutes left, so maybe I will ask you to make a quick conclusion. Ambroise, floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Jean, and thanks a lot for the panel, the panelists. That actually I found the discussion quite consensual at the end. I have one point I would like to stress, because it is actually related to the issue that was raised on how to make the developments in EV charging stations, etc., global. I would just say, for us as a public institution, European public institution, it is absolutely essential that the transition is just. Otherwise, there will be no transition. We have seen that in France, when you have the feeling that the developments are not just, you can basically ruin in 3 weeks what you have elaborated in 3 years. And actually, it is also seen in geographical terms. If you are in Poland, it is more difficult to talk about how to achieve the net zero target than when you are in France. That means that we need to help more those in those geographies or within countries who need more to be supported. And I think this is absolutely essential if we want to be successful in the transition to the green economy. Thank you.
Rodolphe?
Yeah, sure. Now, I think when it comes to net zero, I think we all share the objective. So I don't think that's the question here. I think now it's really a question of readiness, right? How ready are you to basically participate in that? And I think on the financial investor side, on our side, we have done what is required. We've created the tools which enable to invest in there. Again, some of our competitors and friends are doing the same. I think it's really a question of coming down to the public authorities and being able to implement policies which practically enable the private sector's money to invest in.
Thank you. Ms. Galb?
Thanks. Maybe to highlight that we are in a tricky moment, because there is the road to net zero, but it's only part of the problem. We have to look at the global equation, which is in fact energy, CO2, but also natural resources. If we do not make the right choices now in terms of the solutions that we implement to the path to net zero, we are going to build another problem, or to create another problem on minerals, for instance. So green energy is one thing, but certain type of green energy are going to use a lot of minerals and extraction. And in 25 years, if we go on like we are starting to do, we are going to create a huge resources. So my message as a conclusion is that net zero, yes, but there is also minerals, resources and biodiversity as a part of the global equation to be solved.
Thank you. Matthew?
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, I think I'll summarize my sort of takeaways from this as 3 C's. Complexity, heard it from panelists. This is a complex equation to solve, actually, in terms of speed, adjustment. That's the first point. Second point, collaboration requires private sector, governments, advisors to collaborate together to make this happen. And then I think the final point for me is catalyst. We need a catalyst to make this and change, if you want to add a fourth. You need the catalyst to create the change to be able to hit those ambitious targets, as I was talking about earlier. That's all from me.
Thank you, Matthew. Patrick?
Yes, and I will conclude very briefly saying that what we need is the right regulatory framework, and we need it quickly, and then we need not to change it. So make quick regulation that incentivize private investment, that provides public investment where necessary, and then don't change it. And that can be I think, the way to succeeding.
Thank you so much. I thank all the panelists for being there, especially Ambroise, who is outside Paris, but with us. I hope this discussion has been useful to everyone. I think it was interesting and showing that the net zero goal is ambitious, but all the players are committed to achieve it, which is good news. Some of them call as a sense of urgency, which is also a good thing. And I understand also that this idea of having an innovative but stable legal and economic framework is also a very important thing to foster investments in infrastructure in order to achieve the net zero goal. So thank you very much to everyone and bon appétit.